It was a regular morning in the bustling city, with commuters rushing to work, the streets alive with the sounds of honking cars, and people making their way into the towering office buildings. The sun was shining brightly, casting long shadows across the busy sidewalk. In the heart of this urban frenzy, there stood a tall, sleek building with gleaming glass windows, the kind that screamed wealth and success. This was one of the most prestigious banks in the city, a hub of business and finance that many aspired to be part of. On this particular morning, the bank's lobby was filled with well-dressed customers, businessmen, lawyers, and other city professionals, each engrossed in their own tasks. In contrast, an elderly black man, dressed in shabby clothes and carrying a large, worn-out sack, walked slowly through the automatic glass doors. His presence in the pristine lobby was out of place, and the well-dressed people barely gave him a glance, too absorbed in their own business to notice the oddity. The man shuffled up to the counter, where a young woman was typing away on her computer. She glanced up briefly, noticing his disheveled appearance, and rolled her eyes with a hint of annoyance. The man politely cleared his throat, and when she finally looked up at him, he calmly said, "I'd like to speak with the manager, please." The young woman raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed, and motioned toward the waiting area. "You can take a seat over there. I'll have someone assist you shortly." But the old man did not budge. He stood his ground, looking at her with unwavering confidence, as though he belonged there. "No," he replied in a steady voice. "I need to speak with the manager right now. I am the owner of this bank." The woman's expression turned from indifference to amusement. She leaned back in her chair and scoffed loudly. "Owner of the bank?" she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You? I think you've got the wrong place, old man." Her laughter caught the attention of a few people nearby, who glanced over curiously. It was clear they didn't take the elderly man seriously. After all, what could he possibly know about the ownership of a major institution like this one? He looked like he barely had enough money to feed himself, let alone own an entire bank. Without missing a beat, the man responded, "You may laugh now, but I assure you, I am the rightful owner. Please fetch your manager." The woman snickered and stood up, walking over to a nearby office. A few moments later, the bank manager, a middle-aged man in a sharp suit, stepped into the lobby, his eyes scanning the room for any potential issues. When he saw the elderly man, he was immediately wary, not sure what to expect. "What seems to be the problem here?" the manager asked, his voice polite but tinged with impatience. The young woman quickly explained, "This man says he owns the bank, but I think he's just confused. I told him to take a seat, but he insists on seeing you." The manager turned his attention to the old man, who stood calmly in front of him, still holding the sack. "Sir, I'm sorry, but there must be some misunderstanding," the manager said with a forced smile. "This is a well-established financial institution. Do you have any identification or documentation that would suggest you have a claim to this place?" The elderly man reached into his sack and pulled out a stack of old yellowing papers. He placed them carefully on the counter, each document bearing the logo of the bank and dates going back decades. The manager eyed the papers skeptically, but didn't speak. Instead, he took the stack and began to flip through the pages. The young woman, still skeptical, glanced over his shoulder. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" she muttered. But the more the manager examined the documents, the more his face began to change. His confident, dismissive expression started to fade into one of disbelief. There, among the papers, were deeds of ownership, legal documents, and records of transactions that traced back to the very founding of the bank. It became apparent that these weren't just ordinary documents. They were legitimate and bore the signatures of the bank's original founders. The manager's heart raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. The old man wasn't just some delusional individual, he was holding proof of ownership. As the manager flipped through the last few pages, a detailed family tree appeared, one that led directly to the elderly man. "How is this possible?" the manager stammered, trying to grasp what was happening. "This can't be." The man, who had been quiet up until that point, finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. "This bank was founded by my great-grandfather. Over the years, the bank was sold off, and its ownership passed into the hands of others who don't even know the true history of this place. But I never forgot. I've come to claim what is rightfully mine." The room fell silent, The young woman who had once laughed at him was now staring wide-eyed at the documents in front of her. The few customers who had been watching from the corner also exchanged uncertain glances. The manager, still reeling from the shock, took a moment to gather his thoughts. But how could this have gone unnoticed for so long? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The elderly man smiled gently. The people who took over didn't care to look into the history of the bank. They saw only numbers and profit. But I've kept track of the legacy, and now I'm here to set things right. A sense of shame filled the air. The staff, who had initially mocked the man, now stood frozen, unsure of how to react. The bank, it seemed, had been built on foundations that no one cared to remember, and now the truth was staring them in the face. The manager slowly sat down and began calling legal teams and making arrangements. The old man, in the meantime, quietly observed, his calm demeanor never faltering. Hours passed, and soon the bank acknowledged his claim. The staff were deeply apologetic, offering their sincere regret for their initial laughter and disrespect. The elderly man, however, simply nodded. It's not about the money or the bank, he said, his voice now softened with wisdom. It's about honoring the history, the people, and the legacy that built this place. That's what matters most. In the end, the bank agreed to return the rightful ownership to the elderly man. And though he could have demanded a large sum of money, he chose not to. Instead, he vowed to make the bank a place of fairness and remembrance, ensuring that its roots would never be forgotten. The staff, though ashamed, learned a powerful lesson that day. Never judge a person by their appearance, and never underestimate the importance of history. The man who had been laughed at had taught them all the value of respect, legacy, and the power of knowing where you come from.